I'm just really searching right now. I mean, my favorite professor doesn't even believe in God. And my roommate is part of this totally different religion it's actually pretty interesting to me. And then there's my boyfriend who just kind of picks and chooses from different religions. You know, I always thought I knew what I believed about God. Now I'm just not sure.
Well, the good news is it doesn't really matter what you believe, as long as you're sincere.
I shouldn't even have to tell you this, but God never said that.
Well, welcome back to another week of life group discussion for God Never Said That. We're in the fourth and final week, and this week we're actually talking about a really common misbelief about God and spirituality. Well, people will say, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're sincere. It doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're sincere. In fact, in the message, we looked at several of the most popular kind of world religions, and we had to acknowledge just honestly that there may be some truth and beauty in all different religions, but they are absolutely and completely not the same. They're so different. They are not the same. What I'd like to do today is we're going to talk about three different questions. The first question will be kind of an icebreaker question. The second question will take us a little bit deeper. And then the third question, as always, will be a question of application. What are we going to do with what God is showing us? And so the first question what I'd like to do is to have you think about what influenced you spiritually as a child. What kind of spiritual influences did you experience as a child? For example, I grew up in a traditional denominational church, and the reality is I was never really engaged or challenged spiritually. It was maybe not the fault of the church. It might have been my fault for not paying attention, but whatever. Christianity or church was more of a tradition than it was a relationship with God. And all I really remember was the tradition. I remember standing up and sitting down. I remember the robes. I remember the choir. I remember the hymnals. That's really about all I remember. I don't ever remember a message. I don't remember being drawn to God. And that's just all I remember was the tradition. So what I'd love for you to do is go around, and you may have a long answer. You may say, well, I really didn't have hardly any spiritual influence, and that's a fine answer. But talk about what were the influences that you experienced spiritually growing up in your home or your family? All right, let's deal with the second question, and we're going to talk a little bit about the life and ministry of Jesus. In fact, in the message, I just asked people to consider Jesus. Just consider Jesus. Not to consider Life.Church or to consider Christianity, because Jesus really didn't come to start a religion as much as he came to be a bridge between sinful people and a holy God. And really just consider Jesus, who he was, what he said, what he did, his claims, his life, his ministry, his message, the resurrection. Just consider Jesus. And what I want you to do for a minute is just think about this question. What about the ministry of Jesus most impacts you personally? What about the life and ministry of Jesus most impacts you personally? For example, for me, since all I saw was really, tradition, I always had this real fear that I just didn't measure up. And it was only when I started reading the Bible in college that the life of Jesus became very, very real to me. It's like, man, this guy, he totally and completely accepted sinners, and he rejected the religious people. And I never quite understood that. And when I read about the grace of God, that we're saved by grace through faith, that it wasn't about our works, that meant so much to me, because I felt so much guilt, because I knew I wasn't good enough, and somehow I sensed I could never be good enough. And when I just recognized that Jesus was good enough in my place, to me, the only reasonable response was to say, you have my whole life. I'm all in completely. And so it was the grace of Jesus, that he was a friend of sinners, meant so much to me. And I'd love for you to go around the room as you just consider Jesus and answer the question, what about the life and ministry of Jesus has most impacted you? All right, before we dive into the last question, and this will be the question of application, what I want you to do is read Romans chapter 3, if you will, and let's read verses 21 through 26. Romans chapter 3, 21 through 26. And as you do, I want this just to set the tone for your application question as you remember that all of us have sinned, that we're not made right with God by our own works, but we're justified by faith in Jesus alone. Faith in Jesus. Faith in Jesus. It's not Jesus plus good works, or Jesus plus church membership, or Jesus minus sin. It's Jesus and Jesus alone that makes us right with God. And as that kind of settles into your heart, the reality of the ministry of Jesus becomes very, very real. The disciples were willing to give their lives in order to spread the good news of Jesus. And I want you to think about the truth that you're called to be an ambassador. You're God's highest ranking diplomat sent from heaven to earth. Earth is not your home. Heaven is your home. And you're here to represent not yourself, but to always represent Christ. You are his ambassador showing the good news and the love of Jesus. And the third question I want you to ask is simply this. What is God calling you to do to show his love to people who don't know him? What is God calling you to do to show his love to people that don't know him? It could be people in your family, people you work with, people that you see at the gym, people you play sports with, people you do hobbies with. What is God calling you to do to show his love to people who do not know him?